Welcome to episode 2 of the Goal Getters podcast. That podcast is sponsored by Walker's Winners, which is a youth education initiative that was co-founded by me and my son, Jordan Walker, who is an outfielder for the St. Louis Cardinals. So my name is Katrina Walker. In addition to being the co-founder, I am the executive director of Walker's Winners, and I am a high school English teacher and leader with over 26 years of experience. I want to welcome to our podcast today, Maya Walker. Full disclosure. Hello. Full disclosure, she is related to me. She is our youngest daughter, so the youngest daughter of my husband, Derek Walker, and I. And she is therefore Jordan Walker's younger sister, and they both have an older brother, Derek Walker Jr. She is here not because she is related to us, but because she is a remarkable goal setter and goal getter in her own right. So I wanted to give you a little bit of her background. So she is a senior at Fairfield University, where she has been on the dean's list her entire time there. She is a behavioral neuroscience major with a double minor in health sciences and Spanish. She's interested in going into the medical field, working in women's health as a doctor. In addition to that focus, she has also played D1 level volleyball for Fairfield University. So they are part of the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference, which is up in the Northeast. And all of her time there, since her freshman year, she has been part of the regular season MAC winning team, and then has been part of the 3-time tournament MAC championship team. So they've done some remarkable things when it comes to volleyball, and so her sport is volleyball, and she's set some records or been part of the leaderboard when it comes to records at the university. Outside of that, kind of going back to high school, she was the student body co-president her senior year. So her high school had about 1,600 students, and she was responsible for kind of being one of the 2 student leaders for that. In addition, she was in the International Baccalaureate program, earned her International Baccalaureate diploma in addition to her high school diploma. Was really active in musical theater, was part of a Schuler Award-winning cast for musical theater. And in addition to that, was a Girl Scout. So since 3rd grade, she did Girl Scouts and earned her bronze, silver, and gold award. So I feel like I've talked a long time, but I wanted people to understand what it means when I say that you have been a goal setter and a goal getter. And so I'm really looking forward to talking to you about your journey from childhood to where you are now as a senior in college. Anything that you want to say before we get started with our conversation?
No, I mean, that was a great description. That's me.
All right. So we had started by talking about Walker's Winners being a youth education initiative. And so one of our goals is to help young people see how they can get from wherever they are now to where they might want to be. And so I wanted them to kind of connect to your story from childhood. So can you tell us a little bit about how you felt about school as a kid, what you enjoyed about it, what made it enjoyable, and just anything else you want to share?
Yes, of course. I feel like I liked school. And I feel like that shows through everything that I've done for school that's elective, that maybe isn't like part of the curriculum, but I just want to do it. But I feel like when I look back on why I like school and when I started liking school, I feel like I'm thinking of elementary school time when we were doing a lot of projects and group work. One of the biggest reasons I feel like I liked school is because I got to come and be with my friends and like in class, share ideas, work on things together, get better together. But then also like at lunchtime or at recess during elementary school, it was nice to just be able to socialize with them as well. And so in terms of collaboration and group work, in school, I'm thinking right now of my fourth grade Native American project. I still remember my group mates. I remember we presented on the Inuit people, and even though that was years ago, I feel like I still remember details on what we learned because I was able to be creative and kind of put my creative side into my work. And so I feel like that's what made school enjoyable for me. It didn't feel like I was going in and just writing things down and rote memorization. I felt like I was kind of bringing myself into the work and bringing my love for collaboration and people as well.
I think that's a really good point, because a lot of times we will talk about the topics, but as a teacher, one of the things that I see is how much the social part is. Like, when students walk into a class for the first time, their first thing they're looking for is where are their friends, right? When you walk into the cafeteria, it is looking for people with whom to sit. And so recognizing how important those relationships are in school, and how for many people that's, a core part of what they remember and appreciate. So you talked about a project that you enjoyed, and part of it being about the opportunity for collaboration. Can you think back to things you enjoyed less or that you found challenging in school?
Funnily enough, I feel like math was always kind of challenging for me because I don't think it came naturally. And so I think that's where maybe I might have struggled more in school, where when I felt like things weren't just like coming easily to me and I had to really work to understand. And so I think I would definitely get frustrated when I wasn't getting it. When I was little, things like, mental math and those minute math multiplication tables, like, oh, why am I not filling out this sheet as quickly as my neighbor? So I think that things that I didn't enjoy as much were definitely opportunities for me to kind of like look inward and see, why do you not enjoy it? Is it because it's actually not fun, or just you feel like it's harder than everything else? Other than that, in terms of things I just didn't like, I mean, sometimes the structure felt like a lot, being in the same place for 7 hours a day, that could sometimes feel like too much. Like I felt like I was maybe cooped up. But when I'm there and enjoying the things we're doing, then the time can pass by quickly.
It's funny that you say you didn't enjoy math, because I know that in high school, you then decided to get on an accelerated math course. So you actually took a math course virtually so that you could, get to higher levels of math. Why would you do that, given that you said from elementary school, math has been a challenge for you?
So I would say that with math, it's like it doesn't come naturally, but I don't want that. I never really wanted that to hinder me. I knew I liked science. I knew I really liked, literature and stuff like that. And I didn't always know that I wanted to go into medicine, but I was like, math seems pretty key. Math seems like something that I need to know how to do. So with the accelerated math, honestly, a part of it was like, a lot of my friends are doing this. Like, should I be doing this? But also, I think I can, with at least the way I remember it, it's like we had our map testing, and that puts you in a math class that was going to continue on that course for the rest of your years. And so that was determined in like middle school or pretty early on. And so even though math didn't necessarily come easily to me, and that's what frustrated me, I still had a lot of like appreciation for it, I think, and I wanted to learn more. I knew I was capable of stretching myself in math, and I didn't want my natural ability to define what I could do. So most of the reason I did the accelerated course is because I thought I could. I wanted to get to AP Calc BC by the time I graduated, and I knew that if I put my mind to it, I could be good at math, even though I don't think I was necessarily born with the gift of math brain.
It's funny because what you say about math, I think, is insightful, in the sense that there are a lot of people who will stop and say, I'm not good at math, and therefore I'm not going to do it. So I like that you said, I believe that I could do it, even though it didn't come easily to me, even though I didn't naturally enjoy it. And so I'm curious as to why your earlier, I won't say struggles, but the fact that it didn't come more easily to you, why that did not affect your belief in your ability that you could do it if you tried harder?
Well, I think I knew what my work ethic was, and I knew that in other facets of my life, things that I had set my mind to, I was able to accomplish. I feel like a lot of extracurricular activities can kind of instill that in you, whether it be sports or performance, kind of like, things that I did as well, where I was like, where I knew about myself that if I put my mind to something, I could accomplish it. So I just applied that mindset to math, even though it wasn't necessarily anything about math that I was like, oh, I can do that. It was more, I know that I'm capable of stretching myself and rising above where I am right now. And I think because I knew what I had to do to get there. Like this extra class, it wasn't like I was just jumping straight to another level. I was like, if I can really lock in on this extra class and understand what they have to teach me, then I can be adequately prepared for the next level.
So that's a great point too, because we talk about the importance of extracurriculars, right? And normally, it's about developing yourself as a well-rounded person. And we talked about the variety of things you did, but I like your point about how it helps to build confidence about who you are and what you're capable of. Because you have success in this arena, you've thought then about how you can apply those skills to have success in an arena that doesn't necessarily come naturally to you. And so I think, as parents, then that's a good reminder for why we should be very intentional about making sure our kids have, as many opportunities to discover who they are, not only for their interests, but to discover who they are, like what they are capable of. So I think that's a great point. So that actually feels like a nice diverging point to talk about some of the other things that you devoted your time to growing up and kind of how you feel they impacted you. So you can kind of start wherever you'd like and talk about what those activities meant to you.
So I know during the introduction, you kind of briefly mentioned the things I was interested in. It was mostly musical theater, chorus. I took voice lessons for a while, if you can believe it. I did dance in middle school because I did it when I was younger. I was like, I like to dance. Volleyball from middle school through up. Student government, middle school up. And just little things here and there. I remember during COVID, we had like initiative where we were like collecting like PPE. So I was always doing something, that's for sure. And to me, what drew me to these activities was the ability to kind of express different parts of myself. I never felt like I was this, jock who's all into sports and like sports is my thing, volleyball is my thing. But I also didn't feel like I was someone who was going to be on Broadway and I'm going to sing for a living, maybe not even for a living, but just I felt like I had so many diverse interests and I wanted to be involved in these different things so I could kind of fulfill them to kind of compose the mosaic that is Maya. It was definitely a lot of balance required in the commitments. And I don't think I could give necessarily 100% all the time to everything, but there are seasons to things and times in which I can devote 100%. For instance, club volleyball, I started playing that in high school. That was a very serious time commitment. It's tournaments most weekends, practice 2 to 3 times a week for 3 to 4 hours. And so I knew that in the spring during club volleyball season, I'm going to be doing volleyball and I'm going to be doing school. But during the fall, when it's school volleyball and it's not as intensive a schedule, that's when I can do more musical theater. I can be in the fall play, but not the spring play, or fall musical, not the spring musical. And things like that, where I'm just like, different seasons of my life, I'm going to be able to give more to this one interest, but I'm always pursuing everything that I like just because I feel like that's what makes me feel whole.
No, that's great. I mean, I would imagine there were times where it would feel difficult to balance. I mean, you talked about getting to the point where you were like seasons of your life. I can remember sometimes picking you up from dance class and then going to volleyball practice, and there came a point where you're like, there have to be choices made. So how how did you, given all of your diverse interests, because, with that you were doing Girl Scouts and still had school. And so were there times where it felt really hard to balance? And how did you kind of know when, too much was, when what you were doing was too much, and kind of how to balance? How did you kind of navigate your interests, your time commitments, your energy capacity, and so forth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, first of all, I don't want to sit here and pretend like I just have all these things handled and I have everything figured out and you should just listen to what I say. There's definitely plenty of points where I felt overwhelmed by the things that I had committed myself to. I never wanted to let anybody down. I always wanted to stay true to myself. And so there was definitely points where I was like, this is a lot. And now after all these things, I have to come home and do homework. Like, that's a lot to ask. And so, yeah, I would be like emotional about it. I would be overwhelmed by it sometimes. But I think what always got me through and still gets me through, even in busy seasons that I'm in right now, a time with a lot of things, is just remembering why you're doing it. If everything you're doing feels purposeful and you feel motivated, or maybe not even motivated in that moment, but there's an overall goal to it, then I think it's worth keeping. So like with dance, I did end up not, laying that down for now, as I kind of got into high school and got super busy, because while I think that served me a lot as a hobby, I think I felt that other things were either more fulfilling or could serve me more in the long term. I think at that point I knew that volleyball, I wanted to be more serious with it. I felt like really passionate about it. And so I think the ability to maybe, take it year by year or season by season and say, look at everything you're doing and is this still fulfilling to me? Mm-hmm. And also, I think it feels like a lot, and from the outside it looks like a lot, but I think if you're passionate about it, it's something that you're committed to pursuing. That makes sense.
It does. And I think for anybody, I think that kind of having a support system and knowing how to tap into that support system is key. Do you feel like you built, like that you had a support system? How would you encourage people to not just be trying to do everything on their own, and to recognize where there are supports and to lean into those when necessary?
Yeah, I think that it's important, of course, to remember that you can't do it all by yourself. And a lot of these things that I was doing had a very collaborative element for sure. But even outside of the activities, just in terms of friends, of relationships with people in your life, I think it's really important that you spend time with people that you feel reinvigorate you, which is my favorite word right now. I'm not really sure. But I think the last thing that a highly, goal-oriented, motivated person needs is a friend that feels like they are a detractor emotionally, or I guess in any other sense. I think it's very important, especially when you maybe don't have a lot of time, that those that you spend your time with make you feel like they filled up your cup, and hopefully you've done the same for them. And so, I feel like those traits are in people who are just willing to listen. Maybe you have a lot to say about these things you're doing, how you're feeling, people that you feel like are active listeners, care deeply about you and your well-being. And then, just are able to check up. Maybe you don't get to see the support system very often, or etc. But, having people in your corner that are there for you in any season of life, and that you feel like, you can do the same for them. I think that helps a lot, knowing that, you're not alone in how you may feel with the complexities of life, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So building from there, so you actually then in high school decided that you wanted to pursue volleyball in college, but you were doing that during COVID, which complicates that process. Can you tell us a little bit about how you navigated that, that desire to move from high school volleyball to, and how you decided where you wanted to play volleyball?
So, in terms of the recruiting process, I think I was slightly unique in that I started club volleyball late by club standards. I started when my freshman year of high school when I was 15. So, in terms of like my whole journey through, a quick rundown: fifth grade PE, volleyball unit. I was like, wow, this is awesome. Like, I was having so much fun playing volleyball out on the field, just running around. Let me try out for my middle school team. On the middle school team, it was very, if we got the ball over the net, everybody clapped because we're just happy that the ball's off the floor. And then I was like, this is so fun. I love it. In eighth grade, I got asked to come play on the high school team, on the JV team. So I'd walk across the street to the high school after my middle school classes, played there. And I just liked, the energy that came on the court, being able to, again, have fun with just a great group of girls. And it was actually some of my high school teammates and my middle school coach, my high school coach, a few different people in my life saying, you got to play club. You have the athleticism, the height, you're really, really untrained right now, but you could definitely be something great. And so, as we had kind of been talking about at that point, musical theater is my biggest thing. And I was like, well, I have a play to be in. I don't know if I can do this club thing. But I eventually said, let's try it out. Went to my first club, and every single night, every single practice, I walked away having a good time, even though they were late at night and far away and a big time commitment. I felt like when I was on the court, when my knee pads were on, I was exactly where I needed to be. And so as I kind of got older, sophomore year, we were talking about, playing volleyball in college, and these coaches that had told me and told my parents that I should play club were like, she could play club and she could get a scholarship to school. So I was like, let me look into the scholarship thing. Like, I didn't realize we were doing that, but we were doing that. And so, there was the June 15th kind of deadline. This was somewhat new when I was coming up, where college coaches couldn't talk to you before then. So it was very confusing to me, just in terms of, like, you're emailing, you're texting, you're having calls, you're thinking about visits, official, unofficial. And then with COVID, things were limited, coaches were only coming to a few tournaments, if any. If they were far, they weren't coming. They were watching your film, so you had to make sure you got good film. Getting in the gym, managing social distancing, masking. Usually volleyball is put in these huge conference centers where people are wearing their masks down here, and it's like a lot of COVID in there. So, I think my 16 year was actually completely canceled due to COVID. So there was just there was a way fewer opportunities than I think if it hadn't been COVID times. And so that kind of made me think, you had to make the most out of the opportunities that are there. And another big thing I learned is do not take anything but a hard no for an answer. Because the story of actually why I'm in Fairfield, Connecticut right now is because my old college coach who recruited me reached out to me. I was talking to a lot of other schools, so I was like, Fairfield, you could join the line, whatever. But then we kept going on. Other schools, I was like, oh, this is okay. I didn't love it, or they didn't love me, which was definitely part of recruiting. And I looked back at my text, and I looked more into Fairfield. I'm like, oh, I kind of like this Fairfield place. Like, this is really interesting. Let me reach back out to this coach. Radio silence. Like, okay, I understand. I see what we're doing. Let me reach out again. Not a peep. I kept emailing. I kept texting. Finally, coach was like, oh, sorry. Some reason why we hadn't gotten this. Coaches are people too, so we'll allow it. And with recruiting, it's definitely very difficult. But I came up here 2 weeks later, maybe, came to a camp, and that's where I got my offer. So I think resilience is also really important for recruiting at any time, but definitely during COVID, where, you want to capitalize on the opportunities you have. And even if you feel like maybe an opportunity has missed you by, yank it back to you until they say, please stop texting this number,
Okay. Okay, so then you got the opportunity to play volleyball with Fairfield. Tell us what year one was like. I mean, I can imagine getting acclimated to playing volleyball at that level was a transition. Can you give us some insight into what it was like?
It was definitely a huge adjustment period, especially a fall sport. You're kind of thrown in to preseason where you're having two practices a day for 6 days straight, conditioning. It's just you and your team. Typically, nobody else is on campus. And so this was a big kind of look at what playing at the next level was like. I remember my first practice and I was like, this is so fast. Like the ball is moving so quickly. And it was clearly a step up from high school as it ought to be at a D1 level. What I appreciated was the fact that we were able to get kind of used to volleyball a little bit before getting into school, but that's not to say that the school aspect wasn't also difficult. In college, it's interesting because I feel like there's a lot less guidance than the lower levels. They give you the syllabus and it has the test dates on it. And on that day, you should be ready for the test. Maybe in the class before, they didn't even talk about the test. Maybe they didn't even remind you that there was a test, but you had to be ready for that test. And it's a lot more, lecture, you come in, you take your notes. And if you want to do practice problems, you go to office hours or you schedule time one-on-one through a professor. So it was definitely a lot to navigate to kind of learn how they do it in college and the rules, especially with traveling for volleyball and, practicing. But it really helped that here that professors are very understanding of the life of an athlete. But I would say, time management was a huge adjustment period, prioritizing and just trying to be efficient, trying to get homework done when you're on the bus to a game or on a recovery day, maybe you're in the training room and you're studying, or if you have an off day, getting labs out of the way or homework out of the way, just using your time wisely because that is definitely your biggest currency, which is, I think, the number one thing I learned my freshman year.
Okay. All right. So you're playing your freshman year or having a little bit of playing time. I would imagine that when you were going through recruiting, it was not just the opportunity to play volleyball at a competitive level, but the academics also were important. Can you talk about, one, how they factored into your decision for Fairfield, and two, what choices you made about academics once you got there?
I think one big thing that drew me to Fairfield was the behavioral neuroscience major that I'm doing. So when I was in high school, I was really interested in psychology. I took IB psychology and I loved learning about how the mind works, learning about how researchers are able to get behavioral data on people with the different modalities. And I was on the Fairfield website, doing my research for my recruiting. And I was like, oh, this major is in the psych department, but it's not psychology. And it's a really cool mix of, psychology and more neural workings of your brain. So the physics, the chemistry, the biology of your brain. And right now I'm actually doing research in a cognitive neuroscience lab. And that really ties the physics of what's happening in your brain, which we measure with EEG, which is like those caps with the electrodes on it. We measure your brain waves and then we try to relate it to behavioral data that we've observed with reactions that you put in, like answering questions kind of. And so I think that's a perfect way to sum up my major in terms of the two things that it encompasses. And I think that really served me in that I was very hungry to know more. Sometimes with psychology, it's like, here's this principle discovered by this old guy, and this is how people work. And I'm like, okay, cool. But why? Like, I'm always asking why, what's deeper there? And I think behavioral neuroscience was the deepest you could get to the atomic level in terms of what's happening in your brain. What do these structures look like? What are the responsibilities of these structures? So that was definitely a big reason why I chose Fairfield. And then also in terms of just the school in general, small class sizes. I feel like I've been able to get close to faculty, have multiple classes with them. The principal investigator that I'm researching with this semester, she was my professor my freshman year, and I really liked her. And I was like, hey, can I join the waitlist to be in your lab? So I think that Fairfield is really unique in the way that you feel a personal connection with the people that are teaching you, and I think that's another big factor. And then once I came here, I only had that major figured out, none of these minors. But I had to take a Spanish class for our core curriculum, our Magis core, and I loved the Spanish department. I had one professor in my career Spanish for health studies class, like medical Spanish class, who I just feel like I really connected with, and she encouraged me to keep going, even though I had filled my requirements. She was like, keep studying, keep getting good in the language. You'll definitely need it as a provider. So, and I had also taken Spanish for most of my life, and I knew I wanted to be fluent or at least get really good. So I decided to add that as a minor. And then when I was talking to my advisor and telling him that I wanted to go into medicine, he said, health studies is the way to go. And I've also found that really enriching, especially with my capstone I just took, where I was able to make a presentation about maternal mortality and really explore more of the field that I'm hoping to go into. So the addition of these minors has actually been really a big part of my experience, because it's been nice to kind of experience other departments here. And then also, again, everything always ties back to me being well-rounded and liking a lot of things. But it was nice to be able to, take classes to fulfill that without overloading my schedule with like a triple major or something like that.
And I feel like you had credits from your IB diploma, which allowed then you to have more flexibility to pick up minors, right? And so that just, for students kind of looking ahead, thinking about high school courses, picking up college credits to give you flexibility in college. And so that certainly has served you well. All right, so there are two directions I'd like to go on. One follows the Spanish direction, and the other is looking at what you're interested in doing in your career. So I will tell you both questions, and you can kind of answer them as they serve you. So you talked about wanting to get fluency with Spanish, and so I know that part of what you did then was an exchange program to Salamanca, Spain. And so just if you could talk a little bit about that experience and what it meant to you, and what opportunities to travel abroad do. And then you mentioned maternal mortality. Like, what kind of medicine are you interested in practicing, and why do you want to practice in that field?
Okay, so in terms of the Spanish and the abroad experience, luckily I had the privilege of traveling a good bit as a kid, and I think I knew that I loved being able to see other cultures and experience other people around the world, knowing that your world isn't so big, or your perspective or your life isn't so big, is honestly very comforting, because it's like maybe you feel very inside your head, and being able to go out and see the world kind of takes you out of it and forces you to kind of walk in other people's shoes, not necessarily in a bad way, like not, oh, walk a mile in this person's shoes because they're going through all these things. It's more like, experience what life is like for other people, and get a chance to kind of live like that. And so I think my exchange was a perfect way to do that. I lived with a host family, and I went to the University of Salamanca, which was a 10-minute walk from my host family's apartment. There was a lot of other exchange students, international students there. There's a lot of, Korean students, Brazilian students, and it was really cool to kind of, our shared language there is Spanish, which I thought was awesome. And I knew that if I wanted to get fluent, or at least start my way to fluency, I needed to be immersed and forced to speak that language to get around. I remember my roommate and I went to a coffee shop every morning, and she would tell us how much it costs. And when it got down to the change, it got a little dicey. We'd give her like a 10 cent. She would give it back and be like, no, I need this. And we were like, what does that mean? But it was a great way to be forced to practice. It's like, either you're going to speak Spanish correctly, or you're not getting your coffee. So you have to lock in. But I definitely would love to go back. I think I'm so happy that I was able to get that experience, because it only reinforced, I think, the benefits of seeing other places in the world. In terms of
So let me pause right there. I gave you two questions, and then so I'd like to hear the benefits because there are a lot of people who, you know, you mentioned having the opportunity to travel as a child, so that made it perhaps feel more natural than if you hadn't. And there are people who maybe haven't had opportunities to go outside their community, their city, and so they may be hesitant about traveling to a different country. Can you, from your experience, share why you think that it's worth overcoming whatever trepidation people have to experience international travel, and particularly to experience living somewhere abroad?
Yes, that's a great point because I think, I mean, I even hear people saying, you know, I don't want to go to New York City. It's dangerous, and it's an hour and a half train from here. So not even other countries, but also any other place. You're right. You know, there's trepidation behind that. And I think, first of all, it's really important to, I think, do your own research and not necessarily go believe something based on a preconceived notion from someone else or based on what you've heard. Oh, I've heard that place is dangerous. I heard that place is XYZ. You know, see it for yourself and be able to determine, you know, what you actually think about that. And maybe that looks like prior research before you go. I know before I went, I was Googling, I was looking on everything about what exactly this place was about and what it would look like for me there. So definitely doing research beforehand, I think puts you at ease. But I think for me, it was really eye opening being a guest in someone else's country, in someone else's space. You know, that wasn't my house. There's rules like in Spain, they're very big on water conservation. So, you know, your showers need to be short. And if they're not short, your host mom knocks on the door and says, water, you know, like watch the water. And so I think it honestly, I don't think I was a selfish person, definitely, but it definitely teaches you to, you know, being able to adhere to other people's customs. And I think that's important because when you come back, it makes you a better person. It makes you more understanding. It makes you think of how other people can see a situation before you. You know, it's really interesting hearing my host mom. It would be interesting hearing my host mom watch the news and about things that are happening back in my country or what she's heard about my country. She asks me if these things are true, and I'm like, oh, it's kind of funny hearing what other people think from the outside looking in, and I'm kind of doing the reverse right now. I don't know what I thought about Spain before, but now I'm seeing it with my own eyes and understanding a lot more. So I think it is a way of kind of doing your own research and getting your own eye on the world, and instead of letting others tell you what to believe about something.
And before we leave this point, one of the things that I thought was really cool about how you spent your time in Salamanca is really all of the places in Europe you went. So can you just kind of list some of the places that you kind of springboarded to from Salamanca, and just maybe a quick thing about any, like why you were intentional about going to some of those places?
Okay. So I went to Marrakesh, Morocco, which is in North Africa, because it's pretty close to Spain. And I'd never been to any country in Africa before. I thought it was really cool because it didn't look like a lot of the European cities that I ended up going to later. But I loved a lot of different things about their culture. Like I loved the fabrics, I loved the jewelry, I loved the mint tea that they drink. Which I actually learned that's drinking hot drinks when you're in a hot temperature helps you feel cooler because your body is now more akin to the outside air, which I thought was really interesting. But like learning little facts like that. So I went to Morocco. I went to Paris, France, which my aunt lives there. So I had been there before, but I love Paris. I loved the weekend there. I went to Lisbon, Porto, and Ibero, Portugal, because Portugal is neighboring Spain. So again, it's easy to get there by train or bus. I went to Las Islas Canarias, an island, a Spanish island that's off the coast of North Africa. I went to Madrid a lot. I went to Alicante, which is a region in the south of, in southern Spain. I think that's it. I was there for 8 years.
Germany?
Germany, how could I forget? I went to Munich. Oh, Sonia's gonna be so upset at me. I played with how could I forget Germany, of course, to visit my awesome friend Svenja. We went to Munich and then spent some time in her hometown as well. So a lot of really different places and did a lot of different things, but at the core, it was just all about exploration, experiencing another lifestyle, meeting new people, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And what was cool, before we move on, I thought it was, some of those things you did with friends, right? Some of them you did with the travel group you were doing. Sometimes you met friends from high school that you knew who were traveling there, and some you did solo. So you went to Morocco solo, and there are a lot of people who would be intimidated by the idea of going to a different continent solo. And so the way that you did your research and made sure that you had the proper things in place to make those trips. But all right, so that was travel, and then the benefit of seeing the world from another perspective and imagining how the other world sees you, kind of getting outside that bubble. All right, so now we're turning back to that second question that was asked a while ago, but we had like a nice drill down. So how did you kind of discover that medicine was what you wanted to do? And I know there was a period where you were seriously considering being a physician assistant, and now are looking more towards being a doctor. Can you even tell us a little bit about that process?
For sure. I think I touched a little bit on psychology and what made me like that, just in terms of figuring out how we work as humans and what systems our body does to, keep us going, and how to solve when things go wrong. So I think that's what initially drew me to medicine. I was just like, I'm really interested in the science of the human body, and I'd love to be the one that can use my skills to fix when things are compromised. Just because I think that's such a powerful thing to do. And I think it requires a lot of trust. And I knew that I'd be able to give my patients, the compassion and trust needed to go through things that are very intimidating and frightening, and especially something that a lot of people don't know a ton about. I hope to also be an educator in the field and be able to communicate some of the things that are intimidating and feel like too much for someone else to learn, and be able to give my patients and students, an understanding of it. And so I think what drew me to women's health is actually, it started, I think, in my career Spanish for Nursing and Health Studies was the full name of the class, but it was basically my medical Spanish class. We also learned about the forced sterilization of Latina women and Black women in the 1970s in California. And then again, my project on my capstone class was maternal and infant morbidity and mortality for women of color. So I've always had a focus kind of on the disparate rates of maternal outcomes for women of color versus white women in the United States. And I think that was a part of what drew me to women's health. I wanted to give back to my community, especially like my community of Black women, because I feel like they've really enabled me to have all the resources that I have at my disposal to learn everything and travel and explore. And I felt like it called to be able to give back to that community. But then also at the same time, I think women's health is another one of those foggy areas that I hope to be able to provide clarity on. There's so much misinformation and so many differing opinions coming from qualified people and not qualified people that make kind of, especially women's reproductive health, very intimidating to think about and to talk about and to deal with on as a patient on your own, as someone with that. So basically, that's a very long-winded, run-on sentence to say that I'm really interested in women's health because I want to provide clarity in the field, and I want to be able to give back to people of color.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I know that we've been talking a while, and so there are just a couple of points that I want to address before we go. One is about leadership. So you've had opportunities, throughout your life to be in positions of leadership. We talked about, Girl Scouts, and the way that you could operate as a leader within Girl Scouts. I mean, I think about cookie booths and and the ways to reach out to people, and then obviously high school, and then you have been co-captain of your volleyball team for the past 2 years. So if you could share what leadership means to you, and what you think makes a good leader, and what you strive to do as a leader.
I think what makes a good leader is the ability to recognize the strengths in each one of your teammates and have the skill to pull it out of them and allow them to give the best of what they have to the team. I think leaders can identify roles for people well and think, how is this person motivated? What do they need to hear and when? This was a big thing that I worked on my first year as a co-captain in volleyball, because the two other women that I was captains with had been the captains the year prior. And so I was kind of stepping into this new role, and I was trying to think of what can my role on the leadership team be, and what does my voice bring to people? And I think the consensus was encouragement. I think I was able to lift people up and inspire them to perform their best, both by leading by example, but also on an individual level. Someone's down, and figuring out what I can do to bring them back up, which I think is very individual. I think is a great skill as a leader. And I'm not going to say that I figured it out for every single person on my team by the time I was done being captain, but I definitely thought that was a very important place to focus. Even as you're saying in the Girl Scout cookie booths, we had people doing the cheers and the chants, but we also needed people to count money, and we needed people to fill bags. And maybe I knew that one of my troop members did not want to cheer and did not want to dance, but she was great at counting the money. So let's let her do that and be great at that, while us people who like to project our loud voices, we will do the chanting. And so recognizing that everybody has a crucial part on the team, and allowing them and inspiring them to bring 100% of their best versus whatever you think they need to be bringing, I think is one of the tenets of how I think a leader should act.
Okay. All right. So it's really about the people part, right? The knowing the strengths and the areas where growth areas, for lack of a better word, but like encouraging them to be their best selves. But at first, it seems like it's seeing them, right? Seeing who they are, seeing their value, recognizing and supporting those. Yeah. All right. Well, then. I feel like there are, you've talked about a lot of things, and I think that there might be, so the question is around, how do you, or what do you do to kind of maintain joy, or do you feel like you maintain joy? But obviously there's a lot that in balancing that can drain, and I think you've talked a little bit about ways that you're intentional around that. But is there a particular thing you want to share about what brings you joy or what inspires you? And so kind of ending on that note.
For sure. I think when you spend a lot of time thinking about yourself and your team and the people around you, and being productive, getting things done, studying, working out, it's very easy to be very self-centered and inward. So I think the things that bring me most joy and allow me to kind of decompress from that are things where I can either create or kind of be immersed in a different world. So when I say that, I mean reading, watching movies, watching TV sometimes. I would say movies more so, where you can be immersed in a different storyline in somebody else's life. And it's kind of a great, I think, honestly, break for your mind, because you're not so focused on these things that you need to be doing, but more focused on the storyline of somebody else's in a different world, kind of. So I love doing that to decompress. But I also, in terms of the creating, I love cooking. I think it's really nice to be able to do something with your hands, and pour love into a meal, and know that you get to reap the benefits, and you get to consume that love back. So I really like doing that as a kind of a relaxing activity, and just expression of like self-love, setting myself up with delicious meals that I made, and I took the time to kind of to invest in myself in that way, if that makes sense.
It does, and so I love how a lot of things come back to creativity, right? You talked about reading and kind of immersing yourself in another story, and I feel like that can tie back to things that you've been interested in since you were a child, in terms of like being part of the creative process. So looking at creativity, whether it's a book, whether it's a musical, whether it's cooking, as a way to rejuvenate, right? You're making something, you're doing it with love. And because I know that you're a vegetarian, the ways that you've had to be creative around that too, and finding meals, and it's giving so that challenge of kind of navigating is also another way, seeing challenge as an opportunity to be creative. I think is also a good reframing. So there's a lot, I think, about how we can claim joy in those choices we make, about being in creative spaces, being in things that feed us literally and also spiritually. So yeah, I think those are great points. Is there anything else that you want to highlight or share with us before we close out?
I just want to say that I'm really excited about the goal getters and Walker's winners, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak for a little bit, and I can't wait to see what else you have in store.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure talking with you. I really appreciate the time. And, we look forward to ways in which your story can, help others see what they may do on their own path as they make choices about their future. Thanks so much.
Of course. Thank you.